welcome to Commander Central episode 114, and today we are going to be taking a look at listener John Foley's Jund Negative Counters deck. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And we don't have Chris again, although he should be back for the show that airs on Monday, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's the plan.
All right.
For now. It's a lot of time between now and tomorrow.
It is, and I miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too. I got to see him last night at the shop.
You did. You got to play some games last night at the shop.
I did. So it was a good night.
I am recording this remotely from a hotel room in Ohio, since I'm traveling for work this week. So we're doing a true remote show, and I missed playing at the shop this week. How were your games this week?
They were good. I only played a handful just because I had to get back here, prep for this show, prep for tomorrow's show. So do a bunch of prep for our listeners. But, I got a couple games in, good games in. Dramoka got a win.
Nice.
The deck lives.
That does feel good.
It was a good night. Shop was packed like normal. We got that summertime kids back from school crowd now.
Yeah, there's been a lot of new faces in there lately that I'm assuming are people back from college for the summer.
Yep, and some of them seem like high schoolers, or like maybe they're going to be seniors in high school. But yeah, shop had a good 24 to 30 people again last night. Well,
and I've seen, I think, a couple different people in our Slack that are local players that are gone for the summer as well that are like, man, I miss playing in T20. I like that meta. So that always feels kind of good too. Any exciting? You got to play with Chris. What was he playing for a deck?
Chris brought out Mogus.
Oh, nice. I have not seen Mogus for a while.
Yeah, neither had I, and I kind of forgot how to play against the deck for a while.
Was that the one where listener Matt was also getting to play against Chris for the first time?
Yes, Matt finally got to play with Chris for the first time. He was playing his Lazav 2.0 deck.
Nice.
So that was a fun deck to see take the game with a phage activation.
Oh, that's how he won it?
Yeah,
wow.
Chris set him up with a Factor Fiction, but we'll tell that story on Monday's show, I think.
Sounds good. I got to see, I don't think we've recorded since then. We had a really long game. Well, yeah, because we had a listener in town we'd mentioned, but I don't think we've recorded since then. So we played a few games on a Friday night, and I think you had left, and we wound up with a 5-player game that took like 2 hours. It was the last one of the night, and it was one of those games where everyone's deck made everyone else's deck worse. Like it was like an anti-synergy game. And whenever anyone would go to win, someone would have an answer too. But just beyond that, it was just everyone slowed everything down. And I think it finally got won at the very end with a Mycosynth Lattice into Vandal Blast.
Oh, that's a scumbag move even I can appreciate. So scumbags unite there.
And at that point in the game too, he had enough stuff out that he was able to clean up everybody else with their 0 board state, within a turn or two. So it wasn't bad, but yeah, it was like, oh, yep, that's gonna end it. That was the final thing that turned the corner. But it was pretty ugly. But it was fun, and we got to play the listener, which was a lot of fun too. So that was a good time. But I've not played since, and I'm going to be jonesing for a game after missing this week now.
Yeah, well, you will be welcomed back with open arms. I can tell you that almost all the graveyard decks made an appearance last night because you were not there.
Got to keep them in check. With my new Leyline of the Void announced as a core set reprint.
About time.
So we did get some feedback from listeners last week about our homework show, actually, and quite a few people messaged us saying that they liked hearing us talk about, first of all, the changes we made to decks specifically, and then us go back and hit them up, 6 or 8 weeks later to see how they worked out. We, in part, did that for War of the Spark because there was so many cards in War of the Spark that were really, really good and that went into our decks, but I feel like Modern Horizons is probably going to be a similar set. There's just a ton of cards in there going in decks as well. So I think we will do a show in the next week or two probably where we will kind of do a similar thing. We'll go over the cards from Modern Horizons that we put into decks, and then we'll come back and revisit them, I'm going to guess probably towards the end of August, and take a look at how those cards played for us. So people liked that show, and it worked out well for us and the listeners as well, so I think we're going to do that again.
Yeah, I received a lot of verbal feedback from players in the shop, too, about the same exact thing.
Good.
They want to hear us do that essentially for every set if we can.
Excellent. Well, cool. All right. Well, we will keep doing that, especially if it's a big one that has a ton of cards like the last couple ones have.
Right.
I'm going to do a little shout out here as well. Our good friends at the Brothers Warcast. If you don't listen, you should listen. But they are now known as Commander Social. They have renamed their show after episode 100. And they got a new logo, new theme song. But it's still the same great show it's been, So if you haven't listened to them, you should check them out. They are really good guys. And I enjoy listening to the show. I just listened to the newest one this morning on my drive for work to where I am right now. And I just thought, you know what, since I just redid everything and are kind of starting over at show 2, if you aren't a listener, you should jump on board.
Yeah, totally. Ryan and Zach put on a great show. I've gotten to know Zach pretty well in our Slack, just chatting with him every other day.
Yeah, same here.
So it's been a lot of fun getting to know them, and we will get to meet Zach for the first time in Vegas this year, and we'll get to meet up with Ryan again because he was part of Atraxable last year.
Yeah, we got to see Ryan last year, so Zach is making it this year. I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to reach out to us and say hi and tell us about our shows, if you enjoyed something that we did or didn't enjoy something we did, how would you find us, Max?
Head over to Twitter. We're at CMDR Central. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, searching the same thing, CMDR Central. We're also on Patreon, where if you're able to support us monetarily, we greatly appreciate that. You get access to our chat room with all of our other listeners, along with even one of these Decks You Play episodes.
Absolutely. And you know what? We just like talking to people. And there's a lot of people besides us that are smart in that Slack as well that have good feedback on decks. It's really, really active, and it's worth your $1 to just be able to talk to people about decks, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it very bluntly here. There's a lot way smarter people in there than me, so...
Right, yes. I mean, I think I've fooled some of them, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's a great place. I actually found one of our listeners in there did a trade with me for a foil Sarah the Benevolent, so
nice.
we'll be mailing him the cards he got from me later this week.
And we can discuss in that future show what decks Sarah the Benevolent is going in, although I think we all know.
I think, yes, we all know.
You can also find us at flipsidegaming.com.
Yeah, head over to flipsidegaming.com. Use promo code CMDR in all caps. It gets you 10% off all orders, $10 or more. And they just announced today, so Wednesday the 19th, their core 2020 singles are now available for pre-order.
Excellent. And there's been some pretty good ones. They've figured out core sets, starting at Origins and the last year and now this year. They seem to have figured out how to make an interesting core set.
They definitely have, but I think I'm along with the majority of the party here. They need to let off the gas pedal here with sets. I have officially given up putting War of the Spark cards into my decks. Like, I'm not doing a second pass through the set. Like,
it's like
D-Spark would be great in Regnincroft, but I don't want to have to figure out what to put into that when Kaya's Guile might just be a little bit better.
We need a breather. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love sets and I want more of them, but yeah, I feel like they definitely could have spaced those out a little bit better.
I would agree with that.
We do have a couple of contests that are ongoing right now.
Yeah, so if you support us on Patreon during the month of June and are still supporting us by the beginning of July, you'll be entered in to win the complete Teferi Temporal Archmage EDH deck donated by Michael Shea Woodward, a listener and fan of the show. The link we will post in the tweet, or he usually retweets it with the link to the deck list. It's a powerful deck.
It is.
I mean, I kind of goldfished with it the other day.
There's a lot of good, valuable cards in it, too. I mean, he didn't screw around and just send us a bare bones deck. It's a legit, real deal Teferi Chainveil deck.
Yep, so we'll be giving that out to one lucky patron supporter probably the second week in July after the 4th of July holiday. We'll be announcing that after that week.
And I think we have a smaller Twitter giveaway as well for a Lorwyn deck, one that I found in one of my collection adventures.
Yeah, we are giving away the Lorwyn Kithkin Militia Precon deck. It has been opened, but all 60 cards are there. So just retweet when you see that tweet pop up once a week. The first one went out today because I forgot about it earlier this week. So I did that this morning. So that's why Dana's Drive got pinged every 7 seconds with retweets.
I did. I got a lot of them.
But yeah, so those are the 2 contests going on this month, and we'll have a couple more new ones next month. Oh, the final thing about Patreon.
Yeah.
We do have a stretch goal going on.
I just made the note, like, we should talk about the stretch goal, and then, of course, I just forgot about it when we were discussing Patreon.
If you... so the stretch goal is when we hit 200 patron supporters, and we hold that for about a month, similar to what we did at the 100 mark.
Yep.
We will do another live deck build on air, so it might be a Thursday show, it might be a Monday show. Yep. We'll figure that out when we get there. But then that deck, and it will have no lower than a $400 budget, we're going to buy that deck and give it to one of our lucky patron supporters.
Yes.
So this is one of our new ways that we want to give back to all of our Patreon supporters, is by doing these stretch goals and some of the new Patreon rewards that will be announced in the beginning of July.
Yeah. And that was a fun show to do. I'm glad we did that, and I think we'll definitely be doing more of those down the road.
Yeah.
Speaking of decks, let's take a look at listener John Foley's Jund Negative Counters deck. So John sent us some notes as Max usually requests, and he says his meta is semi-high powered with 2 sliver decks, a few fast token decks, and a couple of Voltron decks. They don't really play combo, but the removal and counters have been increasing. The goal of the deck is to play his secret commander, the Scorpion God, and Hepatra, and then remove or neuter enemy creatures, then win through either beats or with tokens or some bigger creatures. He said he's having trouble with removal that comes with the hate of a control deck, and he'd like more win conditions. His budget is around $200, give or take, and if he thinks there's a better Jund commander for the -1/-1 counter theme, he's willing to change. He also said he's trying to stay away from Infect, even though it kind of syncs with a -1/-1 game plan. So a couple of things we will mention here to start. His commanders are Tana the Bloodsower and Vial, Smashwer the Fierce. So he's using partners to get the Jund color combination. Is there anything you could think of, looking at the commanders available, Max, that would work better than what he has right now?
That's kind of the first thing I did when I was doing my preparation for the show, and I don't think there is.
Man, I really didn't like. There's some good Jund commanders, but none of them jumped out as me as being things that would have worked better here.
Right. I mean, you could run Prosh, but then you're gonna walk into it's a Prosh food chain deck. Every Jund commander does kind of their own thing, and I think this is the best way to go about it, is using the partners.
For sure. And like the deck has a token sub-theme, and Tana plays into that, and Vial Smasher just does damage. It's just always useful. So, yeah, I think that's the best combination, too. I looked over them for a while, and nothing seemed like it was a more logical fit here than these two.
Yep.
A couple things. The deck has an average CMC of 3.35, and that's average. That's maybe a little higher than you would like, but it's not bad.
I'm happy in that area. I mean...
And here's the thing. I had this conversation with a listener. I think it was in a DM on Twitter, so it was private, but we were talking about average CMC for decks, and one of the things I wanted to note, like, it's a useful statistic to look at. However, it can be like a little bit misleading sometimes too. And this deck has a Blasphemous Act in it, for example, and that's 9 CMC, and you could swap that out with a Damnation, and hey, his average CMC is going to drop from 3.35 to like 3.29, and that looks great, I guess, on paper. But the reality is that Blasphemous Act never costs 9 mana. Like, if you're casting it for 9 mana, there's no point in casting it when there's nothing on the board. You're casting it when it's like 1 or 2, maybe 3. I think I've cast Blasphemous Act for 4, maybe once, but like, it's almost always 1 in a multiplayer game. And so, his average CMC of 3.35 really isn't that. Like, that spell is slower. Conversely, if you're running something like a Cyclonic Rift, well, that's 2 CMC, and if you replace that with something like Evacuation, well, that's more, so your CMC is going to go up. But the reality is, you never cast Cyclonic Rift for 2 mana. You cast it most of the time in ways that matter for the full 7. So, like, CMC is a little misleading. You shouldn't get too hung up on, I want to lower my CMC on average from 3.35 down to 3.29 or something. It's a good tool just to eyeball where your deck is at, but I've seen people that kind of get really wound up and I want to get below a certain number, and the exact nature of that number really isn't important because of the CMC of some cards. Hangerback Walker, it counts as 0, and it's not 0. So don't get too hung up in the specifics.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, it's a good benchmark to look
Yeah.
at. Just kind of points out that you have 17 8-drops in your deck.
Right.
You know?
And if your CMC is 4.6, that's high. No amount of Blasphemous Axe is making that be that high. And if it's 1.4, that's not because you have a bunch of Hangerback Walkers either. That means your CMC is really, really low. So it does tell you some things, but like the exact number itself isn't necessarily that important.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to address, and it applies to this deck as well, but like it's something I've noticed with my Glissa deck. If you are running a strict theme deck, in my Glissa deck's case, I'm running Death Touch creatures, and in this deck, it's really adhering to a -1 counters theme. Making changes and tweaks to those decks gets tricky too, because there's not that many creatures or things that make -1 counters.
Correct.
So it kind of, like, this deck is super cool, but also I'm looking through it, I'm like, I'm looking up -1 counter stuff, and I'm like, the good ones are just here, and I don't want to take any of them out or encourage taking them out, because then it moves the deck further away from what it's trying to do. It's just a tough balance to find sometimes.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I mean, you and I both kind of build on a thematic routine,
Right.
and
like
sometimes that new Death Touch creature isn't better than any of the ones in your deck.
Right, exactly. And there's sometimes there's great creatures that come out, and I'm like, yeah, but it's not in the theme of what I'm doing, so I don't want to run it. Like that absolutely does make things tricky. So, and this is one of those decks, like because of the theme he's running. Hey, it's easy to look at a deck and say Grave Titan would be great in this deck, and Grave Titan's great in every deck. But like it also then would require pulling out something like Obelisk Spider, which normally isn't a very exciting card, but it works in this deck because it does -1 counter stuff. So, all of that being said, let's dig into the nuts and bolts here a little bit and take a look at the land base to start out. There's 37 lands and 17 basics. That's a really, I'm trying to think what the word is. You've resisted temptation much better than I have when I built a 3-color deck. If you've managed to keep yourself to 17 basics, bravo to you, sir.
Yeah, for sure. And, a lot of the non-basics in this deck are the deserts from the Amonkhet block, because they all interact with the -1 counters situation.
Yeah. And there's even like Raging Ravine, that's a man land that gets +1 counters, and I'm guessing it's for a little bit of synergy with the proliferate effects that are in the deck.
Yep.
So this is a really solid looking land base. Like I said, he's resisted temptation in a way that I usually don't. I think my 3-color deck has, 8 basics in it, which isn't great. I will absolutely get killed by a Blood Moon.
You have 8 basics in Crush?
Yes.
Oh, I know. I got to find a back to basics for Broadway now.
Yeah, no, that's not good. But if I'm not getting punished for it, I can get away with it.
Oh.
And it's one of those things too, where like, even if I do get punished for it, in 1 out of 4 games, maybe I don't care. Maybe it's worth it to have a great mana base too. And that's one thing I think people need to, when you're discussing like how many basics you run, there is an absolute best practice. It's one of those things like you should always have, 12 to 14 basics minimum, I would say, in most of your decks. However, you also should drive exactly the speed limit when you're on the highway. But if there's never any police cars on the stretch of highway you're on, you can probably clock it in at 67 or 68 and never, ever get punished for it. So you kind of have to do that math for yourself and figure out if it's okay to speed, or in this case, not run basics.
Exactly.
Other than that, I like the land base. I like Arcane Lighthouse in here a lot. I like Detection Tower, particularly because he's trying to put counters on creatures, and that gets around anyone's hexproof ability. And he has 2 ways to do it. That's clever.
Yep. And then you have your typical, Phyrexian Tower as a sack outlet. You have some shock lands. But there are some cards, in my opinion, that could easily get swapped out.
So what would you replace here?
So, Smoldering Crater is just a cycling land. It comes in taps for red.
Yep.
I think Spire Garden, you're already running Luxury Suite, the Battle Bond land. You can put the green-red one in here.
So generally speaking, my thought about cycling lands is you need to have some extra synergy to justify them coming into play tapped. And there isn't really any extra synergy with cycling in this deck.
Exactly. No, there really isn't. So that'd be one of my cuts. Knowing that he's running every desert he can, essentially. There's no scavenger grounds.
There isn't. And it doesn't, like his deserts don't necessarily care about other deserts, but scavenger grounds would care about those deserts.
Yes.
And it's just like you mentioned, people running their graveyard decks to the shop. Man, it does. Like, scavenger grounds has won me games by shutting off somebody else.
Yes.
So that I would run that for sure. I agree with you there.
You brought it up. You just brought up Raging Ravine. I actually would take the man lands out.
I would too. I get the synergy totally, but I don't know if it's worth it.
Right. They feel slow,
yes.
Especially when he's having problems with the meta getting faster.
Yes. Yep.
So I would replace those with either Rootbound Crag and or Cinderglade, which is the fetchable Battle for Zendikar land.
Between the amount of basics he has in the deck and the shock lands and stuff, those will almost always come into play untapped.
Yeah, Rootbound Crag, Cinderglade, and Dragon Skull Summit would be the next 3 duels I would add to this deck.
Yeah.
They're all relatively cheap. I think Cinderglade's under $5. The other 2 are in standard, so they're probably around $5. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to look those up right now, but people can yell at me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think they're roughly around that price last I checked.
But I mean, otherwise, like you said, this mana base is super solid. He has some fetches, he has the shocks, just... You could take out the slower lands that don't kind of keep up in the meta and replace them with stuff that's always going to come in untapped.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, and I think even like the best man land is usually recognized as being the blue-white one whose name just floated away from my brain.
Celestial Colony.
Celestial Colony, there we go. And it's an absolute house in Modern where a 4/4 with evasion hits somebody for 1/5 of their life total.
Right. I mean, it's a 4/4 flying vigilant creature, so you can animate it and then tap it for mana later.
Yeah, it's a great card there. In Commander, where it's dealing 1/10 of somebody's life total, and you still have 2 other opponents, that's not nearly as good as it is in other formats. And it's coming into play tapped, where you have 3 other decks that you have to worry about being aggro-y and fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would agree. And that's the best man land. I think these 2 aren't as good as that one. So, I agree. I just don't think they'd bring enough to the table. Let's take a look at artifacts next, Max. We're looking at 7 artifacts in this deck. And since there's only 7, I'll read them quick. There's Cauldron of Souls, Contagion Clasp, Contagion Engine, Mind Stone, Skull Clamp, Soul Ring, and Thematic Compass. So Cauldron of Souls makes sense here. It's it's an artifact where you can tap it and choose any number of target creatures, and they gain persist until end of turn. He's got ways to remove -1 counters from his stuff and get rewarded when doing that. So in addition to being able to save his board state, there's some extra synergy there. That makes sense there completely. Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine, both that proliferate effect is really, really strong. So I get those 2. Skull Clamp, because there's a token sub-theme, great draw engine, and you have 2 Mana Rocks and Mind Stone and Soul Ring. Thematic Compass is one I was unsure about. I like the card, but I don't know if this is the deck for it. What do you think of the 7 artifacts he has?
So I like them all except for Thematic Compass.
Okay. And I like Thematic Compass in general.
I do and I don't.
Okay.
My issue with it in this deck is I'm thinking he's using it for the land portion when it turns into the Maze of Ith, essentially. At that point, maybe just run Maze of Ith.
Sure.
Because you are running 17 basics. You could cut 1 for Maze of Ith.
And even then, and I mentioned this on the EDH Recast when we had Gavin Verhey on, and he thought I was an idiot for saying that Maze of Ith is kind of overrated. He didn't call me an idiot, but he definitely didn't agree. But I mean, Maze of Ith, I do think is a little overrated. I think that untapping a 2/2 is, I guess, useful, but probably isn't that impactful in the grand scheme of things. And when someone's swinging at you with that giant Voltron up creature, pretty often it's wearing Greaves or Swifties or something that prevents you from untapping it.
Yep.
So I think it's a fine enough card, but like I don't know if I love it the way I maybe did when people were less careful with protecting their stuff, a few years back.
Yeah. I also think you're in green in this deck.
Right.
You don't need something that fetches basics. For what, two mana, you could run Nature's Lore and go get any of your dual lands.
And it fetches them 2-hand, right? This isn't putting them on the field. This is just spending 3 mana to go get a basic 2-hand.
Right. And, I mean, there could very well be times where you just drop this and it flips. Which is fine, I guess, if that's the goal. I think you just put talismans in and, like, a commander sphere. I
agree. I think you replace it with a mana rock or ramp. Nature's Lore, Rampant Growth, a Farseek, or a Signet or a Talisman. I agree. The rest of them make absolute sense here.
Yep, totally agree.
That was easy. Man, we're getting good at this.
It's because Chris isn't here.
That's right. Chris is the problem. Make sure we tell him
we love you, Chris. We love you, Chris. Don't leave.
Yeah. Don't go. Enchantments. Let's jump over to enchantments now. 12 of them. You want to list them for us here,
Sure.
Max?
Let's list them off. So we have Awakening Zone. It makes the Eldrazi spawn, so it's a token producer. They also make mana.
Yep.
Beastmaster Ascension. We'll come back to that one. We have Blowfly Infestation. This says whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, if it had a -1/-1 counter on it, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. So it plays into the theme. Crumbling Ashes. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. That seems synergistic.
Yeah, it does.
Cryptolith Rites, for when he does make a bunch of tokens, you have a bunch of mana. Everlasting Torment. Damage can't be prevented, players can't gain life, and damage is dealt as Wither.
Makes sense here.
Flourishing Defenses. Whenever a -1/-1 counter is placed on a creature, you may put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token into play. So that plays on both themes. Yep. That's a great card. Goblin Bombardment. Sacrifice a creature. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Growing Rites of Itlimoc. Journey to Eternity. So that's the Golgari flip enchantment from Ixalan Block.
Yep.
We have Nest of Scarabs. Whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, create that many 1/1 black insect creature tokens. And the final one is Phyrexian Reclamation. 1 in a black, pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand.
So, you wanted to discuss Beastmaster Ascension.
Yeah. So, if I remember right, this was one of my cards on my cards that got left behind episode from about probably like 15 episodes ago.
I think it
20
was,
episodes ago. When looking at the rest of the deck, when we go through the creatures, those are essentially the token makers, is what we just read, besides Tana.
There's a couple other small, yes, for the most part, that's where they come from.
Yes. Beastmaster Ascension needs a lot of work to be able to trigger, and it's just a removal target, in my opinion. If this deck was more focused on making tokens and not -1/-1 counters, I could see it being in the deck because it gives everything +5/+5. I still don't think it's that great because you don't get evasion with like Trample or Vigilance or something like that.
Yeah, Beastmaster Ascension requires you to go wide, and it requires you to have a way to punch damage through, whether it's through evasion or through Trample. And this deck, the ability to go wide is there, but it's not a huge portion of a deck like you would see in like a Risa Redeem deck or something, in a dedicated like true token deck where that's the number one strategy. And there's not a good way to get evasion with those creatures. So you're going to wind up in a situation where you're swinging with those guys, even if you manage to trigger the Ascension, okay, they become, 7/7s, 8/8s, whatever. But if there's only like 6 of them, which is still a pretty good board state, they can get blocked pretty easily. And maybe we could throw for 12 damage or something, and maybe that's enough to win, but like there's enough games when it's not enough to win, and then you're wide open for the crackback. And I think in this particular deck, if you want that effect, you would probably be better off just going with some kind of an overrun. Whether it's the actual Crater Hoof or whether it's an overrun or Overwhelming Stampede or something. I think if you want to do that thing, I would run one of those because it's probably going to kill somebody if those, like turning those tokens into 8/8s or 9/9s with trample one time probably kills people more consistently than turning them into that without trample with Beastmaster Ascension, where you can do it for multiple turns.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we're really overlooking here, this deck is a -1/-1 counter deck, and a lot of the creatures that put -1/-1 counters on stuff do it to all creatures, not just your opponents. So that +5/+5, if you have a creature with 2 or 3 -1/-1 counters on it, is really only +2/+2.
Right.
So it's counterintuitive, in my opinion, to what the deck's main focus is.
Yeah, it's a card I like a lot, and I do still think, despite I agree with you that it has kind of been left behind a little bit, but I think there's absolutely decks where it's still a powerhouse. I just don't know if this one is it. I think there's other things that will do that a little bit better. And he said he doesn't love Infect, but like there's a lot of synergy here with Triumph of the Hordes.
That is on my. If you had to add one Infect card to this deck, I would put it Triumph of the Hordes. It would
be that one. I agree, and I would consider replacing Ascension with it as well. So I agree with that. The rest of them look good. Journey Eternity makes sense for one thing. I should have mentioned under artifacts. Maybe I can mention it right now since basically I forgot about it despite having a note on it. There's I think 11 creatures in this deck that have an ETB ability, and it's almost always a -1 counter thing. I don't know if that's enough for a Conjurer's Closet necessarily, but I don't know that it's not enough, if that makes sense. Like, it might be enough. What reminded me was Journey to Eternity kind of lets you recur a creature as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Conjurer's Closet would be better, or maybe just Panharmonicon for 1 less mana.
And maybe neither of them are good enough. Like, I think you're right on the edge at 11 creatures or 10 creatures. I think that's right on the edge of what you need. But I think it's close enough that it's maybe worth taking a look at.
Totally.
And Journey to Eternity is kind of one way to do the same thing, although then it flips over and is in a useful land as well. But that reminded me that I think that's one that you could kind of consider is Closet or Panharmonicon, like you said.
Nice.
I think the rest of these look pretty good. Goblin Bombardment is a solid card, particularly in a token deck. Forcing Defenses, it makes you more tokens and it has some nice synergy there. Growing Rights, I would guess, flips pretty easily in this deck.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that's a solid enchantment suite beyond that. Sorceries. We have a couple of board wipes to start things off. Black Sun Zenith with some nice -1/-1 counter synergy. And a card we mentioned earlier discussing CMC, which is Blasphemous Act. We have a couple of ramp spells in Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. We have a draw spell in Damnable Pact that can also be used as a kill spell, and that's something that I did a lot in my Draina deck that was like a big black mana deck, but even if you're not making a ton of mana, there's probably plenty of times you top deck Damnable Pact on turn 11 and look around like, oh, that dude's at 10 life. I can just kill him. Or I could draw 7 cards. So I'm a fan of that card, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Decimate's nice removal spell, a couple of tutors in Demonic Tutor and Devout Content. Finale of Eternity as a kill spell, and has some upside there. Liliana's Influence is a -1 counter spell, and Driven/Despair, which was one of those Amonkhet Aftermath cards. And for those who don't recall, the Driven part, creatures you control gain trample, and whenever they deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And the Aftermath portion has whenever they deal combat damage to a player, the opponent discards a card. So there's 2 board wipes here, both of which you can probably get off fairly cheaply and fairly quickly in Black Sun Zenith and Blasphemous Act. What do you think here, Max? Does he need 1 more or 2 more even? He said he's got a lot of token decks and some aggro stuff.
Okay, here we go. So this is kind of how I looked at this deck, more of a how do you deal with the problems, not how am I going to win? Because in some decks, dealing with the problems, and it kind of relates to my Dramoka deck we talked about a couple weeks ago. Maybe just dealing with the problems and making it till turn 20
is how you win.
Is how you win. So, I think the first thing that needs to come into this deck is something like Maelstrom Pulse or Sever the Bloodline.
Oh, yeah.
Because, Maelstrom Pulse is 1 green and a black for a sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents with the same name of whatever you targeted. Cool, I'll choose Elf Token that, Reese the Redeemed is making. I just killed 30 tokens.
Right.
Sever the Bloodline does the same thing, but it's a mono black sorcery spell and it has flashbacks. So you get 2 uses out of it.
But it does only hit creatures, unlike Maelstrom Pulse.
True, but if you're worried about tokens...
Right, for sure. I'm a big fan. I'm a fan of both of those spells. I do think he's a little light on removal in general in this deck. I do think Maelstrom Pulse, it's actually gone down in price quite a bit too.
Yeah, it's under $5 for the Ultimate Masters version, or might be $5.
Yeah,
so
being able to hit a token wave, but if there isn't a token wave out, you can still kill that Doubling Season or that, someone else's Panharmonicon or somebody else's, whatever problem card they have out. It can hit any non-land and a Token Swarm.
Right. And, you might just be okay blowing up everybody's Soul Ring.
Right, yeah.
It's not just creatures. If 2 people have Soul Rings out and they're way ahead on mana, and kill the Soul Ring.
And I have actually used it in the past to kill, like when someone had a commander out and someone had a similar creature out that had Greaves on it or Boots. I actually have used it in the past to kill a creature I wasn't concerned about that someone else had the same one out that I was concerned about because it was suited up or something. That's a super, super corner case, but like the ability to kill something with the same name is pretty useful. There's a lot of like useful corner cases for that for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one there. I think the weakest spell in this bunch is probably Driven to Despair.
Yeah, I get that it has some draw card aspects in it, but I think it's just slow. You can see it coming. Cool. You're targeting a specific, or your creatures, I just got to block stuff.
Right. And I said the creatures aren't that big. I mean, you're going to trample through and draw a couple cards, but I think it does 3 different things, which is good in theory, but it doesn't do any of them well enough to justify giving it a slot. I'd rather run a card that does one thing really well consistently every time. So I think that's the weaker card there for sure. I'm unsure about Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, particularly because he's talking about being in a meta where everyone's speeding things up. If you switch that over to the Rampant Growth, Farseek, Nature's Lore kind of card,
Lore.
It's 1 turn faster, and in particular, Nature's Lore, the card comes into play untapped, so you can use it that turn. But you're paying 1 more for Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, and you get next turn's land drop as well.
Right.
One of the things I've noticed for myself is I like Cultivate and Kadama's Reach less and less as the years go by, but I tend to draw a lot of cards. So having that second land drop in hand off of Cultivate and Kadama's Reach tends to be less useful to me, who's usually drawing that second land spell via draw spells, than it once was. That there's not a ton of draw on this deck, so maybe that's more useful here than it is for me.
Gotcha. So when I build my decks that have green in them, they always make the first draft.
Yes, absolutely.
And then depending on what my land base looks like later in the build process, I debate cutting one of them, because I always do run the 2-mana ramp, the Rampant Growth, the Nature's Lore, the Farseek, if I'm in 2 colors. And Pier's Whim always gets a 4-drop slot.
Yeah.
I usually decide if my deck can afford it, can I shift one of those Cultivator Kadama's Reach up to a 5-mana and go with Hour of Promise if I have those utility lands that I would desperately help me, such as like a Nykthos or Hall of the Bandit Lord or a Haste Enabler for this kind of deck.
Yeah, like you genuinely go grab that Hall of the Bandit Lord in your Dromoka deck.
Yep, Hall of the Bandit Lord and Nykthos are always my 2 targets typically.
Yeah, I think that one, I think you definitely want to have some utility lands that are changing the face of the game, and I don't think there really are any of those in this particular deck. And like I said, I think there's not a ton of draw, so maybe the Kadama's Reach and Cultivate do make sense here.
Yeah.
How about the instant spells? Yeah.
Good, because that's where the rest of my removal comes in.
Good.
So we have 6 instant spells in this deck, starting off with Chaos Warp. Court of Calling, that's a tutor, I get it. He makes tokens, perfect. Grim Affliction, it puts a -1/-1 counter on target creature, then it proliferates for 3 mana. Seems like a good play into the deck.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mausoleum Secrets, for those that don't know, because I didn't, it has Undergrowth. Search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. There is Summoner's Pact, and then Torment of Venom, which is put 3 -1/-1 counters on target creature. Its controller loses 3 life unless he or she sacrifices another non-land permanent or discards a card.
So the first thing I'll note here, there was already 2 tutors under the sorceries, which are Demonic Tutor and Diabolic Intent. And now we have a couple more here in Summoner's Pact, in Mausoleum Secrets, and in Court of Calling. And if you remember back in the beginning, we mentioned he kind of has 2 secret commanders in this deck, which are Hapatra and the Scarab God, right? No, not the Scarab God, the Scorpion God.
Scorpion.
So the ability to go get those tutors makes sense since like they are essentially what the secret commander here is. However, I don't think in particular Mausoleum Secrets is good enough.
I will 100% agree with that. The fact that it is very susceptible to graveyard hate, 1.
Yep.
And 2, it's based on the number of creatures that are in your graveyard. If you have this in your opening hand,
it does you no good.
It does you no good. You'd rather see Demonic Tutor. I would rather see Worldly Tutor. That is what I would replace this card with in a heartbeat.
And, it comes to the end of the game and you have your secret commander out and you're in a good shape to win and you top deck that and you're like, oh, there's nothing I can go get right now that's a black spell because you're limited to black.
Yep.
That's going to put this away. Whereas, like, if you have another type of tutor, whether it's Diabolic or whether it's Worldly, there might be an option where you can go get something that will turn the game around, like a Crater Hoof or like that Overwhelming Stampede. So yeah, I think that particular tutor is too limited in multiple different ways for this deck.
Yeah. Like I said, Worldly Tutor, even like if you wanted to spend the money on it, a Vampiric Tutor.
Yeah.
I even think Summoner's Pact might not make the cut either. I mean.
Well, particularly, yeah. So I think especially now that Finale of Devastation is a card.
Yes.
It will get you the creature you want, but like, hey, go grab Scorpion God with a Finale and have it come into play. And if you happen to be, turn 12 or something, when you have the mana to make it come into play as a 12/10.
Yeah.
And then buff the rest of your creatures at the same time. And, it can double as a tutor and a win condition.
Yep, I totally agree with that.
So yeah, I would agree. I mean, Summoner's Pact might be on the edge there too for that same reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, you mentioned this under sorceries, but I think the deck is lacking answers to a degree, particularly in terms of removal.
Yes.
There's basically Chaos Warp here and to a degree Grim Affliction. You have the 2 board wipes and you have Decimate, and that is really it. I mean, I guess Liliana's Influence as well, and there's a lot of -1 counter stuff, so I don't think this deck wants the go for the throat kind of removal spells, but I think maybe like Beast Within, similar to Chaos Warp, it just solves any problem.
Yep.
And man, I have a tough time not running Beast Within in a green deck.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like like I said, it solves any problem you would have, including creatures, but I mean, hopefully you're going to keep the board swept up enough with all these -1 counters that they're not that big of a deal. But I do think, I feel like the deck wants one more thing, and I think that would be the one more removal spell I would add.
And I took it to the whole next level.
Okay, so what do you got here?
So I had Beast Within on my list. It's just it's an auto include in green. Terminate is another one of those. It can deal with problem creatures that maybe you can't get enough -1/-1 counters on.
Sure.
Artifact Mutation, because even if you don't destroy the artifact, you're going to make some Saproings, which will feed the token game.
I mean, is it 2 mana, a red and a green?
A red and a green.
That's really efficiently costed too.
Yes.
I mean, if you hit someone's Soul Ring, if you spend 2 mana to kill a Soul Ring and make 1 token, that's probably worth it.
Yes. Or you kill a Signet or a Commander Sphere or
let alone
whatever.
If you hit someone's, like, what's the dragon?
Traxos.
Or Traxos,
Scourge.
right. Or whatever. Like, there's a bunch of big things that you can hit and suddenly it gets gross. But even at the bottom end, that's definitely a high floor kind of card.
Yes. My final two are to deal with the token onslaughts. The first one being Sudden Spoiling, just to nuke them down to O2s, and then if there are other buffs Cathar's Crusade or like a Dictator Heliod, you still got to deal with that, but even turning an army of 1/1s into something and, Sudden Spoiling them, that's a fog.
Sudden Spoiling's always a great card because it does 15 different things, but in a deck where you're frequently putting counters on something, that makes it way easier to kill stuff. That's a really good include. I didn't even think of that because I'm such a fan of the card in general, and it just escaped me. But this is absolutely a perfect deck for Sudden Spoiling. Absolutely.
Yep. And then my final one is Rakdos Charm. And I think all three modes are very effective in this deck.
Man, Rakdos Charm is just underplayed in general, I think.
I think Rakdos is underplayed in general.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So, the first mode is exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Okay, there's the graveyard hate.
Which is always second useful. Mode is instant speed, too.
Yes. Second mode, destroy target artifact. Artifact removal.
Yep.
That's always good. Third, each creature deals 1 damage to its controller.
And if you play against a lot of token decks,
they have just fallen to their own demise, essentially.
I mean, like legit, if you are playing against multiple aggressive token decks and you top deck that, there's times you're just going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, you might get hit for, 5 to 10 damage, but I really don't see this deck, besides the tokens, having a lot of bodies out at once.
And if you're, like I said, if you're not playing against a token deck, hitting a graveyard at instant speed is still super useful, and so is destroying an artifact, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, all three modes are relevant, but one of them happens to be kind of a kill condition in your meta.
Exactly. So those are my suggestions for more instants.
Those make sense to me. What are your thoughts on the two Planeswalkers here?
So we have Liliana, Death Wielder. That was the pre-con Liliana from Amonkhet.
I believe so, yes. 7 mana. Yeah.
5 loyalty. Her +2 says put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Her -3 is destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. And her -10 says return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield.
I mean, listen, I'm running, actually I'm currently not, but I was running some bad Gideons some of the pre-con Gideons in my Zero deck for a while, and I've now taken it out as well. I had one of the bad Tezzerets on my Vela deck for a while, and it's now out too. So I am all for running bad intro deck Planeswalkers if it's on theme or you like them. And if that's the case with this Liliana, I get it. I don't think she's good enough for this deck.
No, I totally agree. I think he's running it because Liliana's influence finds it.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But it's not like you're going to cast both the same turn.
Right. And Liliana's influence, I think, is one of those cards that in this deck, 6 mana to put a -1 counter on every other creature is worthwhile. But I don't think that value add is worth running.
A 7 mana Planeswalker.
Yeah, I just don't think it is.
Nah, nor do I. The sad thing is I don't know what to replace this Liliana with except one of my removal spells.
But I think that's probably fine. I think, I would not feel bad. I would rather draw a Beast Within, I would wager 90% of the time than I would draw this.
Yeah.
Or the Sudden Spoiling or the Rakdos Charm or whatever.
Yep. So the second Liliana in this deck is Liliana Dreadhorde General, the newest one from War of the Spark. 4 black. Her static, she comes in with 6 loyalty. Static ability of whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. +1, create a 2/2 zombie token. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. I think this one's good enough.
I mean, her passive, if that's where it ended, Liliana Dreadhorde General, 6 mana for 6 loyalty, that did nothing else but whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card.
Yeah.
I maybe consider running that. If that's where it ended, I'm like, maybe. The fact that you can +1 her and protect her immediately, put her at 7 loyalty, put a body in play, And if they swing through trying to hit her, that zombie dies and you draw a card. Like, there's just a lot of good synergy here. I think that one is worth it as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you there. You don't have to ulta. You don't even need to, the -4 too. I would bet like he has tokens in his deck, but he says other players are playing token decks too, which kind of makes that -4 probably not as good. But again, who cares? Making a zombie as a wall and drawing cards off stuff that dies, that's probably enough. So I'm with keeping her in the deck. How about the creatures? 23 of them. And this is what spurred my comment earlier about how, like, if you're staying on theme and trying to do a thing, it gets tricky to suggest replacements. Because it's easy to say, oh, this removal spell isn't as good as this removal spell. But, like, I don't want to tell you to pull out this one good -1 counter thing for, Sun Titan. I guess we're not playing white, but, like, for a just generic...
Grave Titan.
Right, yeah.
For Grave Titan.
There we go. For a generically good creature, just because almost all of these creatures are in simpatico with what the deck wants to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Did you have any suggestions for creatures here?
I do, but I really only have one thing to remove because... like you kind of said, it's hard to find a -1/-1 creature that's better than any of these.
Right, like you're not going to replace Necro Skitterer or Soulscar Mage or obviously.
Well, I would replace Soulscar Mage. That's the one I would take out.
Really?
Yeah, because if a source you control would deal non-combat damage, so there's no burn spells in this deck. There's no.
I missed the non-combat part. I haven't seen the card for a while, and I reread it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good fit. Yeah, that's a good point.
That is for sure the one I would take out just because there aren't many non-combat damage spells in this deck.
Having better read the card, I would agree with you.
But I have a bunch of additions.
I'm going to quick point a card out that I actually liked a lot, seeing it in here before we get any further.
Sure.
Just before I forget. And it is Generous Patron.
I loved seeing this.
Man, because I
had to read it twice.
I did too.
Because I'm like, why is this in here?
And I remember when I first saw it and it came out, and I was like, oh, I might run that in my +1 counters crash deck, and I didn't put it in there. Whenever Generous Patron enters the battlefield, support 2, so you put a +1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures. And I'm like, okay, well, it comes into play. I'll put a counter on Crash and one on probably the Patron, and it becomes a 2/5. And then I'll draw 2 cards, and that's actually pretty good for that amount of mana. I'm like, oh, I'm probably going to run that, and I never did put it in the deck. But the next part is what I didn't think through. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, draw a card, and actually kind of scratch that previous part. Putting counters on my stuff wouldn't draw me a card. But it says counters, not +1 counters. So you can still be greedy here and put the +1 counters on your stuff, or you can put them on someone else's stuff and draw 2 cards, and then throw some -1 counters on them to kill those creatures anyway, and draw that many more cards.
Yes. That is so cool.
Yeah. It's just like, that had not occurred to me ever, the fact that it would just said counters, and it will work if you put -1 counters on something. That's just a fantastic little, like, pickup here that would not have occurred to me for this deck. So what suggestion did you have here, Max?
Okay. So I think Massacre Girl should be in this deck.
Yeah, yeah.
She enters, put a -1/-1 counter on something. Then if a creature with -1/-1 counter dies, do it again.
And that's good.
That turn.
And if you happen to have Generous Patron out, just gets busted.
Yeah. The newest card to the MTG community would be Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. Both those I think are really good includes. Yawgmoth is a tad pricey, so
and there's some,
we know
there's some nice added synergy with the tokens this deck makes in there as well.
Yes. So my next one is Harbinger of Night. So this is a 4-mana, 2/2 black, 2/3 spirit, and it says during your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature.
On each creature.
So it's going to hit your stuff, but some of these other things in the deck list hit your own things.
Right.
But it's just a nice upkeep trigger that's going to help advance your plan.
It's one of those ones, too, where I think you probably have to play it to see how badly it affects other people over yourself. Like maybe if you play it, you'll find out that it just doesn't work because it hits your stuff too much. But I think you have to use it to find that out for sure.
I mean,
it's just tough to get a visual on how that's going to work just like playtesting the deck. I think you have to see it in action.
I mean, at your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on those 10 tokens.
Right, yeah, and they're gone.
And they're gone.
Yep.
My final include for creatures is Evolution Sage.
That's the new
it's a landfall proliferate.
Yep.
So it's a proliferation effect. You have enough lands where I think you're probably going to get this engine going. Play it, put a -1/-1 counter on something, play a land, make it 2 -1/-1 counters. Oh, something died, Massacre Girl triggers. You know, I can see the loop going in my head right now.
Sure. Do you think there's enough synergy? And this is a card that I'm looking at my notes again. I'm like, oh, I skipped past that portion. Karn's Bastion as a land. We mentioned it on our review show how much we liked it. I think this is a good deck for Karn's Bastion.
4 mana to proliferate, right?
Yeah.
I think it's fine because Contagion Clasp costs 4,
right.
Contagion Engine costs. It's just a redundancy to those 2 cards, and it can tap for a colorless mana. Yeah, I think you could easily pull a basic land out for that.
And I'm not running it in my +1 counter Crush deck because looking at that. Well, but also like looking at the deck, I very rarely have a bunch of creatures out. It's usually like 1 or 2, maybe 3, and like rolling those up from 10 to 11 or something isn't really a big deal for that amount of mana because the creatures in that deck, because of the way it's built, are designed to go tall. However, putting an additional -1 counter on a bunch of stuff that you would choose, you probably wouldn't choose your own stuff then, you'd just choose your opponent's stuff, but like that can be a huge deal. That's the difference between something living and something not living.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think this is a deck where I would absolutely at least test out Karn's Bastion, and I think you would find there's a lot of times it's what puts you over the top.
Yeah. What about you, Dana?
Creatures I really struggled finding because I was trying to definitely stay with the -1 counters theme, and I had one of the ones you had, and after that I was just kind of like, man, there's just not a lot of stuff that I could change and still keep this deck doing what it's trying to do right now.
Yeah. I do have another removal, like a creature we could cut.
What would that be?
That would be Quill Spike. It's 2 in a hybrid Golgari, and then it's a 1/1. It has an activate ability of Golgari, hybrid Golgari, remove a -1/-1 counter from a creature you control, and it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. I get the synergy, but it also doesn't have any evasion. There's no trample, there's no flying. So now you're just making a 4/4 blocker that's going to block a token.
Assuming there's a -1 counter on a creature you control in the first place.
Yes.
And there may not be. I get this energy here with like something like Cauldron of Souls, and maybe that's why he's running it, just for the ability to remove the -1 counters to give his guys persist again.
Yep.
So that makes sense, but it's one of those things. If you don't have those things out simultaneously, like if you just top deck Quill Spike on turn 8 and you don't have Cauldron out, I feel like that probably doesn't feel very good. It probably feels like a dead card in hand. And I try to avoid running cards that, show up as a dead card in my hand too frequently. And I think this one would.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there as well. In summary, really dig this deck.
Yeah, so do I.
I mean, like, people that send us our decks, based on the show we do, we're not super, like, competitive players. We all tend to like something that's a kind of a fun thematic deck. So people tend to send us those decks. No one's like, here's my Blood Pod combo deck. Figure out, what one cut I need to make it slightly faster. That's not what we do. So people tend to send us decks like this. So they're therefore almost always interesting to look at. But I have never seen a dedicated -1 counter deck that wasn't just the Scorpion God. So like seeing it in 3 colors, I'm a big fan of this deck.
Yeah, I think this is a very unique way to look at the -1/-1 counter thing, because you have those 2 hidden commanders, the Scorpion God being really good at what it's doing, and Hapatra being really good at what it's doing. So using the generic partners cards, even though you might never cast them, I think is really cool.
Yes. And I also feel like the deck probably functions without tutoring those 2 hidden commanders up. Like, I feel like there's enough stuff here that you probably can get through and win some games sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I do agree. I think there's a couple win conditions we discussed that would probably help him out here a little bit. I don't think there's some really, like, obvious, or I shouldn't say obvious, some non-obvious win conditions. Like, we just, so I will, this show's going to air on Thursday. The EDH Recast show that airs on Friday, we discuss win conditions. That's like what the topic is. And one of the things I mentioned on that show is I talk about my Vela deck, how when I built it, my win condition was primarily artifact creatures that were going to be unblockable. So I had a few more like big beater artifact creatures because due to Vela's ability, my thought was I'm just going to be able to swing through with unblockable crushing damage and kill people that way. And I do that consistently enough, but that's not what I discovered my win condition was. I found there's different ways with Vela and sacrificing a bunch of tokens at once that can kill people, or using Tezzeret abilities to, hit people for 20, 30 damage sometimes when I have a ton of artifact tokens out. Like, I found the win conditions in that deck as I was playing it. Conversely, my Glissa deck, there's just no win conditions where like Death Touch turns into a way to win the game. So some decks you can find weird win conditions, and some decks you just can't, and you just have to resign yourself to Craterhoof Behemoth and Overwhelming Stampede kind of cards, and that's fine. But I think people shouldn't always expect to find some weird stuff. Like, sometimes the win conditions are going to be the ones that people know about, and that's what it is. And I think this is one of those decks where that's what your win conditions are going to have to be to a degree. They're going to have to be those, yep, it's a Craterhoof Behemoth, and that's what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
But, thinking about Craterhoof Behemoth, you still need to have, 7, 8, 10 creatures in play for it to work. Like, it's not like you just top deck Craterhoof Behemoth and win the game. You have to get in that position too, so don't feel like you didn't earn that win with a Craterhoof, because you did.
Yeah, for sure.
So, thank you for sharing this deck with us. I liked looking at it. I liked talking about it, and I would love to see it in play. And if you would like us to take a look at your deck like we just did John's negative counter deck, you can go to patreon.com/CMDRCentral and sign up to support the show, and we would take a look at your deck in the future. We'll be back next Monday with Chris back in the house.
Woo!
Yeah. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And this is Commander Central.